Alarms tore through the docking ring before I even had my boots on. Red lights spilled across the corridor walls, and a voice on the overhead speaker kept repeating the same warning in 3 languages. A shuttle had crashed into the outer clamp of Station Halvern, and every emergency channel was screaming at once. My name is Colin Ashby, and I was the only medic awake on that side of the station when it happened. Everyone else was either asleep, off shift, or too far away to reach the wreck in time. So it fell to me, alone, with a half-charged medkit, and a heart that would not slow down no matter how many times I told it to. I ran through 3 sealed doors before I reached the crash site. The shuttle had folded in on itself like paper crushed by a fist. Smoke curled from a cracked engine vent, and sparks jumped from a torn wire near the entrance. 2 station guards stood frozen outside the wreck, unsure whether to go in or wait for backup that was still minutes away. I did not wait. Inside the shuttle, past a bent support beam and a shattered viewport, I found her. A young alien woman, pinned beneath a piece of the ceiling that had come loose during the crash. Her skin held a pale blue tint, almost like moonlight caught under glass, and her uniform bore markings I did not recognize but instantly understood as important. Whoever she was, she mattered to someone, somewhere, and right now she was dying in front of me. I pulled the beam back with everything I had, ignoring the guards yelling at me to wait for proper lifting equipment. There was no time for proper anything. Her blood, a shade of silver blue, pooled beneath her side. I pressed my hands against the wound and called for a scanner, and one of the guards finally snapped out of his shock long enough to toss me his emergency kit. The scanner numbers made my stomach drop. Her vital signs were crashing fast, faster than anything I had treated before. I did not know her species. I did not know her blood type, her anatomy, or a single fact about how her body worked. All I knew was that she had maybe 10 minutes left if nothing changed. I called the station's science deck on an open channel, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. A tired-sounding alien named Doran, the station's resident xenobiologist, answered almost immediately. I described her condition in short bursts while my hands kept pressure on the wound. Doran ran through what little data existed on her species. A group called the Ilvanari, known mostly for keeping to themselves and rarely mixing with outsiders. According to every record he could pull up, Ilvanari blood chemistry was so specific that even a small transfusion from an incompatible source could kill her faster than the injury itself. There was no Ilvanari blood on this station. There would not be for hours, maybe longer, and she did not have hours. I looked down at her face, pale and still, lips parted as she fought for each breath. Something inside me refused to accept that this was where it ended, in the wreckage of a shuttle, surrounded by strangers who did not even know her name. I asked Doran a question that made him go quiet for a long moment. I asked if human blood had ever been tested against Ilvanari biology. He said no one had ever tried. There had never been a reason to. I told him there was a reason now. Doran warned me, in the clearest terms he could manage, that this was reckless beyond anything sanctioned by station protocol. Cross-species transfusions without prior testing had ended badly more times than anyone wanted to count. If her body rejected my blood, it would not just fail to help her, it could speed up her decline into something irreversible. I understood the risk. I chose to take it anyway. There are moments in life when the safe choice and the right choice split apart, and you have to pick one knowing you might carry the weight of it forever. I had spent years in emergency medicine learning to read the fine line between hesitation and instinct, and every instinct I had told me that doing nothing was the only guaranteed way to lose her. I set up the transfusion myself, hands steady despite the chaos around me. The other medics arrived just as I inserted the line, and one of them, a calm woman named Priya, helped me monitor her vitals while I explained what we were doing. She did not argue. She simply nodded and got to work, trusting a decision made in seconds that could have gone terribly wrong. The first few minutes felt like the longest of my life. Every beep from the monitor sounded like a countdown. I watched her chest rise and fall, shallow and uneven, waiting for any sign that her body was accepting what we had given her, or rejecting it entirely. Then something happened that none of us expected. Her vitals did not spike into crisis. They did not falter or collapse. Instead, they steadied, slowly but surely, like a ship righting itself after a storm. The color returned to her lips. Her breathing deepened. The monitor that had been screaming warnings only minutes earlier fell quiet, replaced by a calm, steady rhythm. Priya looked at me with wide eyes, and I felt my own breath catch in my throat. Doran, still listening over the comm, asked us to repeat the readings twice, certain there had been some kind of error. There was no error. Her body was not just tolerating the human blood, it was responding to it in a way that defied everything known about her species. We moved her to the medical bay, where the real work of stabilizing her began. Hours passed in a blur of scans, careful monitoring, and quiet moments, where I sat beside her bed simply making sure she kept breathing. The rest of the station buzzed with questions about the crash, about the identity of the survivor, about why an unmarked Ilvanari shuttle had been anywhere near Halvern in the first place. I did not have time to think about any of that. My focus stayed fixed on the woman in front of me, watching every rise and fall of her chest like it was the only thing that mattered. She woke up close to a full day later. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light of the medical bay, and for a moment, she simply stared at the ceiling, as if trying to remember where she was and how she had gotten there. Then her gaze shifted to me, sharp and searching, taking in every detail of my face like she was trying to place a memory that had not yet formed. I introduced myself, keeping my voice calm and even, the way I had been trained to speak to patients who had just woken from something traumatic. I told her she was safe, that she was on Station Halvern, and that she had been badly injured in the crash. I did not mention the blood transfusion right away. I wanted her to breathe, to steady herself, before adding anything else to the moment. She spoke slowly, her voice quiet but clear, introducing herself as Aveline. She did not offer a title at first, only her name, though something in the careful way she held herself told me there was more to her story than she was sharing. It did not take long for the truth to come out. A representative from her people arrived within hours of her waking, someone named Kestrel, who greeted her with a formality that made the guards outside straighten instantly. Aveline was not simply a passenger on that shuttle. She was the daughter of the Ilvanari High Council leader, traveling under a quiet escort that had been meant to avoid exactly the kind of attention a crash like this would bring. Kestrel explained, with a careful mixture of gratitude and unease, that what I had done went far beyond simple medical treatment. Ilvanari blood carried more than just biological function. It carried meaning, tradition, a kind of sacred weight passed down through generations. A transfusion from an outsider was not just medically dangerous, it was almost unheard of, a thing so rare that most Ilvanari believed it simply could not succeed. And yet it had. Aveline listened to this explanation with a look of quiet realization crossing her face, as if she were only now understanding the full shape of what had happened to her. She turned to look at me, and for the first time since waking, something like wonder replaced the caution in her expression. She asked me directly why I had done it, knowing the risk, knowing that nothing about my blood had ever been tested against her people before. I told her the truth. I told her that in that moment, watching her fade in front of me, the odds did not matter as much as the alternative. Doing nothing meant certain loss. Trying meant a chance, however small, and a chance was worth taking when someone's life hung in the balance. She was quiet for a long time after that. Kestrel eventually stepped aside to speak with station officials about the diplomatic situation the crash had created, leaving Aveline and me alone in the room for the first time since she had woken. She studied me with an intensity that made me feel like she was searching for something beneath the surface, something words alone could not explain. She told me, in careful and measured words, that among her people, blood freely given and willingly accepted between two individuals created something called a thread bond. It was not simply a medical fact, it was considered one of the deepest connections a person could form, older than written law, older than any treaty or agreement between worlds. A thread bond meant that two lives were now tied together in a way that could not be undone. I sat with that information for a moment, unsure how to respond. I had not saved her life expecting anything beyond the simple relief of watching someone survive. The idea that my choice had created some kind of formal, lasting connection between us felt overwhelming, even a little unbelievable. Aveline seemed to sense my hesitation, because she offered a small, reassuring smile, the first real smile I had seen from her since the crash. She explained that a thread bond was not a burden or a debt to be repaid. It was closer to a form of chosen kinship, a bond of trust that her people did not take lightly, and rarely, if ever, formed with someone outside their own kind. Word of what happened spread quickly through the station, and within a day, official channels from the Ilvanari Council reached out to Halvern administration directly. I found myself summoned to a meeting I never expected to attend, sitting across from station leadership and a small delegation of Ilvanari officials who had arrived to assess the situation firsthand. The meeting began with formal questions about the crash, the treatment I provided, and the decisions I made in those critical first minutes. I answered honestly, laying out exactly what happened without exaggeration or apology. I explained the risks I understood at the time, the reasoning behind my choice, and the uncertainty that had followed until her vitals finally stabilized. The head of the delegation, an older Ilvanari named Soren, listened carefully to every word, his expression unreadable through most of the explanation. When I finished, he sat back and studied me for a long moment before speaking. He told me that in the history of his people, there had been only a handful of recorded thread bonds formed with those outside the Ilvanari, and each of those had reshaped relationships between entire worlds. What I had done, whether I fully understood it or not, was being seen as more than a simple act of medical courage. It was being seen as the foundation of something much larger. I asked what that meant for me, practically speaking, since none of this had ever been part of any plan I made walking into that wreck. Soren explained that as Aveline's thread bonded, I would be formally recognized within Ilvanari society, granted a status roughly equivalent to distant kinship with the ruling family. This came with certain protections, certain expectations, and an open invitation to visit Ilvanari space, something no outsider had been offered in generations. The weight of that settled over me slowly. I had walked into that shuttle wreck thinking only about the immediate crisis in front of me, the blood loss, the failing vitals, the seconds ticking away. I had never imagined that decision would ripple outward into something with lasting consequences for relations between our peoples. Aveline, sitting quietly beside Soren during the meeting, spoke up for the first time since it began. She said that she did not see this as a political matter first. She saw it as something personal, a debt of gratitude that went beyond formal titles or diplomatic language. She was alive because a stranger chose to act when everyone else hesitated, and that fact meant more to her than any treaty or title ever could. Her words settled the room into a quiet kind of respect, and even station officials who had spent the meeting focused on procedure seemed to soften at the honesty in her voice. Over the following days, as Aveline continued recovering under close medical supervision, I found myself spending more time with her than I expected. She asked about my life, about how I had ended up working medicine on a station like Halvern, far from wherever I had originally trained. I told her about growing up wanting to help people in the moments that mattered most, about choosing emergency medicine because it forced you to make decisions quickly, decisions that could change everything for someone else. She listened closely, asking thoughtful questions, comparing my answers to her own experiences growing up within a family whose choices always carried weight beyond themselves. She spoke of the pressure that came with her position, the careful way she had been raised to consider how her actions reflected on her people as a whole. In some strange way, we found common ground in that shared understanding of responsibility, even though our worlds and our roles within them looked nothing alike. As her physical recovery progressed, so did the diplomatic situation surrounding her presence on the station. Representatives from other stations and even a few curious officials from neighboring systems began reaching out, eager to learn more about the first successful cross-species thread bond in generations. Aveline handled the growing attention with a grace that impressed me, patient with questions and careful with her words, even when the scrutiny clearly wore on her. Through it all, she made a point of including me whenever discussions touched on our shared situation. She never let me fade into the background as simply the medic who had happened to be present. She spoke openly about the choice I made, the risk I took, and the trust that had grown from it, refusing to let the story be told without acknowledging exactly what had happened and why. One evening, as her recovery neared its final stages, Aveline asked me to walk with her along the station's observation deck, a quiet space overlooking the stars that most residents rarely visited. We stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the slow drift of distant lights outside the viewport. She told me that she had spent much of her recovery thinking about how to properly repay what I had done for her. Kestrel and Soren had offered suggestions rooted in tradition, formal titles, ceremonial gifts, official recognition within Ilvanari records. All of it felt appropriate given the circumstances, yet none of it felt entirely right to her. She said that what she wanted to offer instead was simpler, though perhaps more meaningful. She wanted to extend an open invitation for me to visit her home, to meet her family, and to see firsthand the world and people I had helped save, without ever fully understanding what that choice would mean. She wanted me to experience the thread bond not as a distant political concept, but as something real, lived, and personal. I accepted without hesitation. In the months that followed, that visit became the beginning of something neither of us had expected when the wreckage first settled into silence on that docking ring. What started as an emergency response, an instinctive choice made under pressure, grew into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience across two very different worlds. The Ilvanari, once known for keeping firmly to themselves, slowly began opening quiet channels of communication with human settlements, largely credited to the trust established through Aveline's recovery and the thread bond that connected our fates. Officials on both sides pointed to that single moment in the wreckage as the spark that began a slow thaw in relations that had remained distant for generations. I never set out to change anything beyond the immediate crisis in front of me that night. I simply refused to accept that doing nothing was the only option available when someone's life hung in the balance. Yet from that single decision, made in a matter of seconds inside a smoke-filled shuttle, came a connection between two peoples that no treaty or negotiation had managed to achieve before. Aveline often said that the most important bonds are rarely planned. They form in moments of crisis, built on trust extended without guarantee of return, and they carry weight precisely because they were never expected in the first place. I think about that night often, the alarms, the smoke, the desperate seconds spent deciding whether to trust an untested chance over certain loss. I think about the woman I found pinned beneath that broken ceiling, and the friendship that grew from a choice made without any thought of reward. In the end, what began as an act of simple human instinct became something far greater than either of us could have imagined, a bond stretching across the stars, built not on calculation or expectation, but on the simple belief that a chance to help was always worth taking.